Okay, this is problem 3 in Excel Lab 4 for Math 140. And we're going to do frequency distribution for a data set of test grades. So we're going to have a range of data and in bins that we want to put our counts in. And our bins are going to be 5 points each. And we want to create an upper bin limit and a lower bin limit for each bin that we can then use to put our counts into. Now to do the actual frequency distribution, we can use either the frequency function within Excel or the COUNTIFS function in Excel. I will show you how to use both. But with both of them, you're going to want to use an upper bin limit and a lower bin limit, because even with the frequency formula, the Excel treats the data as arrays, and Excel also only wants the upper bin limit. However, to get your data labels and also to use the COUNTIFS function, you're going to want both the criteria separate. So our first bin is going to be from 96 to 100, so our upper limit is 100. Now our decrement value is going to be 4. So for our lower limit, we're going to put in equal. We're going to click our upper limit and subtract our decrement value. Now this decrement value is always going to be the same, so we want to lock that value in place by hitting function F4. It will add our dollar signs and anchor that cell reference. Okay, now for our next bin's upper limit, all we have to do is click on our previous bin's lower limit and subtract 1. And we can copy our other lower limit down, and that is our second bin's limits, 95 down to 91. Now that we have both formulas in place, we can copy that down until we get actually we can see our lowest value is only 54, but typically test grades go down to 0. Now for our data labels, we are going to have to construct what is called a text formula. Now to do that, you put in the equal sign, and our first data label is for our bins from 100 to 96. So we want to click our cell reference for 100, and then we want to join a few text characters. So we use the join symbol of the ampersand, which is Shift 7, double quotes, space, a dash, space, double quotes, our ampersand again, and then our lower cell reference, and hit enter. Just copy these down, and we have our data labels. Now for our frequencies, let's do the COUNTIFS first, because it's another use of the join symbols, and we can make sure we get that good in our minds. So you put in equals COUNTIFS, parentheses open. Now you see it wants the criteria range for your first criteria. Actually, you can have up to 255 criteria in Excel. So you click the first grade, you hit Control Shift down arrow, and then function F4 to anchor that range. Then hit comma, and it wants your first criteria. Now our first criteria is going to be less than or equal to 100, because that was our first cell reference. And then we hit our ampersand and our cell reference, comma. It wants our criteria range again, which at this point we can just copy, comma, and then the criteria for this is greater than or equal to ampersand and our lower limit. And if you hit Control Enter, you will stay in the same cell. and we have 3 grades in our first bin of 96 to 100, and that does check out here under our grades, our raw data column. So if we hover over here in the lower right corner and get our crosshairs, double click, and it copies our formula down for us. And we want to total our column so that we can ensure that we have all of our grades counted. So if we hit Alt equals, and then it highlights the range currently used, and hit enter, we have 18. We will need that total to calculate the relative frequency. For the relative frequency, we hit equal, and then click on the frequency, and we divide that by the total and hit enter. We hit Control Enter to stay in the same cell. And our relative frequency is 16.67%. Typically, I must say this, relative frequencies are also known as probabilities, and a lot of times you won't see them with the percent sign. You will see them left as a decimal to be used in further calculations. However, our instructions for this project, or lab rather, is to convert them over to percent signs. So to convert mine to percents, I went up here under the number. You see this number section, and I went down here and clicked percentage, and it automatically formats it to have 2 decimal places. There's other ways you can do it. You can use the percent sign there. You can hit Control 1, which brings up the Format Cells dialog box, and format your cells that way as well. Let's anchor that total amount, and then when we go to copy our formulas down, it will copy them all down. And let's also do an Alt and equals, Control Enter, and we see we have 100%, so we know we're good. Now, we can tell here that we see that our last grade was here, so we might want to cut our chart off at this last column. Let's do the cumulative frequency and just make sure that that is where we hit 100%. So to do the cumulative frequency, for the first one, it's pretty easy. You hit equals, and you just click that first relative frequency amount and hit enter. Now for this one, you would hit equals, you click the relative frequency amount, and then you add the previous frequency amount. If you hit Control Enter and stay in the same cell, you can then hover your crosshairs, double click, and get your percentages all the way down. And you will see that at this one row, we did hit 100%. So perhaps, let's underline that. So perhaps we want to cut our chart off there. We might want to do it both ways. It's all relative. It wasn't really specified in the instructions. So to do our chart, now the default chart for Excel is a column chart. So if you highlight your data, the first 2 columns here, let's just do these where we hit 100%, and then hit Alt F1, it brings up a column chart. Now typically I delete this. To turn this into a histogram, if you click one of the columns, it selects the entire data series, and if you hit Control 1, it brings up the Format Data Series dialog box, and you see we have a gap width there that is currently set to 150%. So to create a histogram, you can just slide that down to 0. And you would probably also want to include a border of the columns to help differentiate them from each other. And there you have your histogram. Now the instructions also tell us to add a chart title. Go up here to Chart Tools, Layout, Chart Title above the chart. Let's call this Test Grades for Class X. And we are also to label each axis, and that's it. So to label the axis, you go here and you do both. This is for the lower axis, the horizontal axis, which are grades. Grades. That's really all you have to say. And then the vertical axis, I like it to be horizontal. And this is the number of grades. Per bin. And that's it for the... Okay, let's move this chart out of the way over here. And let's go back over here and delete the data. And I'll show you. We'll do it using the frequency formula. So you go to Formulas, Insert Function, Frequency. If it doesn't show up on one of the ones you've recently used, type it up here and click Go, and it will bring it up. There's Frequency, click OK, and it wants the data array first. That is our grade. So we click on the first one, hit Control Shift down arrow, and then we click in the bin array field, and it only wants the upper limit, remember. So you hit the first one, Control Shift down arrow, and then we go over here and click OK. And then we get our crosshairs, double click, and we can see it's the same thing. To create the relative frequencies, it's the same way. You go down and you get a total, which we want to hit Alt equals Enter 18. So you hit equal the frequency that you want to compare and divide it by the total and anchor the total value. Function F4, Control Enter to stay in the same cell. Get your rabbit crosshairs, double click, and you have your relative frequencies. Then you can go down here and also sum these up. Control equal and enter, and you have 100%, so you know it's correct. The cumulative frequencies again, now you remember for this first one we're only going to set it equal to the relative frequency. Now for this one we're going to select the current relative frequency, and then we're going to add the previous cumulative frequency. Hit Control Enter to stay in the same cell, and we have a cumulative frequency. Get our crosshairs, double click, and we have our cumulative frequencies. And we see that again our lowest test score was between 50 and 51. Now to create a histogram, you select your first two column rows, and you hit alternate F1. It brings up the default chart, which happens to be a column chart. Now you select your columns and hit Control 1. You see your gap width is set at 150%. You drag it back down to 0. Add a solid line for a border. to help differentiate between the columns, and then you can add your chart title and your axis labels. As you can see, I added data labels. To do that, you select your data series, usually select all of them, and you format your data labels, outside, and value, close, and that it gives you your values outside the data. And that's it for problem number 3. Excel Lab 4 is now officially over.